Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our My Smart Garden event on seed saving this evening. My name is Kat. I'm your My Smart Garden Program Officer at Hobsons Bay City Council, but I'm also your presenter tonight. And it's really great to be with you teaching one of my favourite topics. Before we start, I'm going to acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the land and also the waterways in Hobsons Bay, and pay my deep respects to their elders past and present. I invite you also to take a moment to consider who's cared for the land under your feet and reflect on the ongoing challenges that they are facing. This session tonight is part of a program called My Smart Garden, and I know some of you are old participants who've been around for a long time learning with us. Some of you may have just found us, so if you have, welcome. We are run by 10 partner councils across the Metro, Naarm, Melbourne area. We welcome everyone who's in the city, regardless of which council you're in. But if your council isn't part of the program, it'd be great if you could let them know about it, and maybe we can bring some events in the offline sense to your local area as well. And the program exists to help you get more out of your gardens, whether they're small or whether they're large, whether you're renting or whether you are lucky enough to own your home. We're all about helping you grow food, protect your home from incredible sun and wind, grow habitat, reduce waste, reduce water use, and so on. And this is really in response to the climate emergency that we're in, as well as the cost of living pressures that so many of us are facing. So we've got events that run all year round, all across the city. And there's two coming up, not in Hobsons Bay, but in our neighbouring council, Wyndham. One of them is Understanding Your Soils, and one of them is on composting for beginners, with two really excellent local presenters. So if you haven't already gone on our website and had a look at our events page, you'll find all of these free events that are coming up then that you can check out. So for tonight's session, I'm going to keep you all on mute, but you are encouraged to ask questions whenever you'd like to through the meeting chat, which I now have open, so I'll be keeping an eye on it as we go. So please do feel free at any point to ask questions. And there's no such thing as a silly question, except the one that wasn't asked. So I really welcome questions from people who are complete beginners, anything that you'd like to clarify, anything that you'd like me to re-explain. And also I do really love in the chat where people who are experienced gardeners, and I know there's some of you in the call, where you feel free to put in your own tips and tricks and things as well. So please do feel free to make the most of the meeting chat function as well. Just a little note, we will have some written notes that will go on our website and also be emailed to you after the session as well. Okay, so that's my preamble. The goals of tonight's session are to learn about some of the biology that underpins seed saving so that you can understand what you're doing and why. This makes quite a big difference in my experience to actually having good results with seed saving. You should be really clear on the underlying science and be able to make really good decisions because of that. I'm hoping by the end of the session, you'll also know a few different methods or techniques for seed saving. And this is actually going to cover all common vegetables and many of our native plants as well for people who are interested in saving native seeds. Although please note, if you are saving native seeds, you need a permit to do that from public land. So the best place to do that is actually probably from your own garden if you're already growing these plants, or from another resident, a friend or a neighbour who might be and who might let you save some of their seeds. I also want you to feel confident to just have a go and also know where to find more information. So I'm really hoping that sounds like a good use of your time tonight. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to jump right in. Let me just flick over to my other slide set for you. Okay. Great. Be really helpful if you could let me know in the chat that you can see what's going on. You should see a big dandelion in front of you now. Let me know that you're out there and that it's looking good for you. Okay, so we're starting off with looking at seeds and what are they even? And the more that I have researched them, the more amazed I am really by the number of strategies and the kind of clever techniques that they have created to spread their species far and wide. And I start with the humble dandelion because you probably pass them every day. But dandelions, you know, what an amazing technique, giving your seeds little parachutes so that they can be transported for great distances to colonize new areas. And the dandelion has even co-opted human children to blow them to transport them even further than they otherwise would. So pretty crazy, clever stuff in my books. But we also have lots of other strategies. So we have little seeds that are small and brown, and these are designed to shatter on the ground and be invisible to birds or other animals that might like to eat them. Then we have the other end of the spectrum. We have very brightly coloured seeds, which are designed to attract attention in the hope that an animal is going to come along and eat them, and then take them some distance and poop them out with a little package of fertilizer. We've got even plants that take it a step further and they wrap their seeds in delicious fruits, again to entice you to eat them. And we've got many of our native seeds that have special adaptations where they'll only germinate after a fire. And we've got some species in there that after the fire, they are emerging at a time when there's very little canopy and there's a fertile bed of ash. So what a clever time to germinate when you know that you've got a fertilizer resource and lots of sunlight coming as well. There are other seeds that won't germinate until rains have come, and they tell that because they've got a chemical coating that has to be washed off them first before they'll sprout. So anyway, I think seeds are amazing, and I did learn recently about a kangaroo grass, a Ephemerida plant, which if you can see my camera there, I've got some of the seed heads here. And these, if you want to look it up, these are actually a self-planting seed that come with a one-way barb on one end and a little awn or a tail that actually helps them to burrow into the ground when they are wet. So it's an incredible adaptation that can actually get them inches below the surface where they can germinate no matter what drought is going on above them. Okay, so yes, you do still have the dandelion pick, thank you. So now we're going to move on. So what even is a seed? What I want you to know about seeds is actually really neatly summarized by an expression that I heard, and I wish I could credit the source, but I can't. A seed is a baby plant asleep with its lunch. A baby plant asleep with its lunch. And I love that so much because it just so eloquently describes what you can see in front of you. And in fact, if you split open most seeds, and this is a rather large lima bean seed here, but most seeds you'd be able to see a little root, which I'll highlight with my mouse, and a couple of little leaves as well. And the rest of this seed is actually the lunch, the packed lunch, because this source of energy here is what is going to get this seed established with a root system and with a leaf structure that can then support it to produce its own food. Okay, so I've got a little schematic here that will show you what that looks like. If you're having trouble seeing that, I understand. And I also wanted to show you this little chart, which I don't want you to worry about any of the words here, but it sometimes helps to be able to envisage how this thing is going to become alive. And you'll note that it starts by putting down roots, and then the first leaves, in inverted commas, that you'll see are actually the two halves of the seed, which is why they can sometimes look a little bit different to the leaves that we're going to get after that. So the first things that we see, which we might think are leaves, are called seed leaves or cotyledons. And then after that, we're going to get leaves that represent the true form of the plant. Okay, so I guess what I think is important to understand here is that although the seed can actually look like it's inert and maybe dead, it's actually very much a living thing at a part of its life cycle that's, you know, small and dormant. And when it comes to successfully seed saving, we need to keep in mind that these are living things, and that has implications for how we store them. And we're going to come back to that at the end of the session, because if you can't store your seeds properly, then they're not going to be living and vibrant and productive for you when you come to plant them. Okay, so why are we even saving seeds? The first reason that springs to mind is just the cost. And I'd love for you to pop your own reasons in the chat, by the way, because there's quite a lot of different reasons why people come to this point. But for me, cost is probably the imperative one at the moment, especially. And the reason for that is that if you're a very productive gardener, and at my place, we're growing most of the fresh produce for the household year round on a little suburban block. But if we were to buy every year the seeds that we need, we could spend, tens of dollars, hundreds of dollars actually, probably. And I just want you to have a look at the photo here of 1 year of dill seed saving versus one commercial packet of dill seeds. And it's obvious the amount that you're getting here. It's huge. So you will actually never be able to plant all the seeds that you're able to save. No way. But that means you have surplus that you can share with your friends, family, and community. Or in this case, actually, dill is a pretty good spice to have in the cupboard. So I'm currently putting it in all of my pickles that I'm making for the year. And I can see a couple of comments here around being adapted to your environment and growing better in your location. And that's absolutely true. We'll come to that in a second as well. So another reason that's quite paramount for me is that we do have stronger seeds. And I'd like you to absorb this photo where we've got a weak seed on the left and we've got strong seeds on the right. And these are both beetroot varieties that were planted at the same time. And when I first started gardening, I would look at the one on the left and sometimes think that was my fault. But what you come to realize when you've got everything else right with your seed raising, and that's not the subject of tonight's session, unfortunately, but when you know that you're doing the right things to raise seeds, it becomes very obvious when the seed is poor quality. And in this case, I just want to show you what strong seed looks like. It's going to germinate really evenly. It's going to germinate quickly, and it's going to kind of burst out of its punnet and be racing to get into the bed. So that's what we're looking for. That's one of the reasons I save seeds, so I can have that kind of success, which always translates into more productive crops at the end of this journey as well. And you can, as Quincy and Sharon have noted in the chat, you can actually adapt your seeds over time. That is a process that happens slowly though. So we're looking at, 7 generations on average, and probably quite a lot more for some species as well. Nonetheless, it's a very worthwhile project that home gardeners and small farmers have done over hundreds of years. And that's why we do have so many varieties that are locally adapted. Another one for me is the flavors that you can get, and also the varieties. This is a photo of commercial tomato harvests. And I know you don't know much about gardening to know you don't pick your tomatoes when they're green. You don't throw them that thick on top of each other into the back of a vehicle. But commercial varieties are usually picked at that time because it's just too hard to pick all these soft tomatoes that are at peak ripeness. So the varieties that are favoured by commercial production are really different to the ones that home gardeners prefer for flavour and for function as well. We like consistently long, ripening over a whole season rather than everything ripening at once usually. So we're interested in flavour. The other thing to say here is that we develop these varieties. There is one wild ancestor of all tomatoes, which is small, about 1 centimetre across and yellow. It grows on the Galapagos Islands actually, and the tortoises like to munch on it. And from this little wild ancestor, the hundreds of varieties of every tomato you've ever seen, every colour, shape or size has descended. And that careful selection over time wasn't done by scientists or big companies. It was actually done by you and I, home gardeners and small farmers. So by saving seeds at home, we actually get to sometimes even develop these new varieties that are, of course, so well adapted to our local area. On a related point, we do have hundreds and thousands of different varieties of every food plant or species we could imagine as a result of these human breeding endeavours over generations. And this is what we refer to as agricultural biodiversity. And this is not only, a nice thing, it's our heritage, but it's also about protecting our future. So this photograph in front of you here is of a dryland seed bank in Syria. And this seed bank became a bit famous during the really terrible war that Syria's been going through because of the commitment to the staff here who stayed behind in a war zone under great personal danger to make sure that all of these varieties of seeds were able to be evacuated out of the country to safety. And throughout history and all around the world, there are people who have literally sometimes died to protect and to save this biodiversity for us, for current day and for our children as well. And it's so important because as we are adapting to climate change, we are going to need new varieties or sometimes old varieties that are better adapted to a new pest or some different weather conditions, maybe lower rainfall. And the place that we get those new varieties, in inverted commas, are these sorts of seed banks. And if not an exact variety, we would breed from them to create the traits that we need. So this is a very serious point around how important the project of seed saving is for home gardeners to contribute to, because we are the ones who actually have created the diversity over time. So I hope that excites you. That's enough of my soapbox. What we're going to do now is start to look at more of the technical background to seed saving so that you can understand what's going on when you start to do it yourself. Before I do that, I know that there will be complete beginners watching this, and it is important for me to say that there are some things that we don't usually grow from seed. And these include potatoes, garlic, and shallots in the vegetable group, as well as many fruit trees and also many perennial herbs. Now, the potatoes and garlic and shallots are usually grown from a piece of a parent plant. So a piece of potato, a small clove of garlic, or a little shallot that we plant. And confusingly, when you buy these from a nursery, they are called potato seed or garlic seed, but they are not a true seed. There hasn't been a flower, there hasn't been pollination, it's not an actual seed. So we're growing from a piece of the parent plant and it is genetically identical to the parent. And that's usually why we do it. And also it's just easier to get things started that way. As a side note, if you're a potato breeder, you will actually save true seed, and it comes from a small fruit that looks somewhat like a tomato because potatoes are in the same family, Solanaceae family. So we do have seeds on those plants, but it's not how we usually grow them as a home gardener. Similarly, for many fruit trees, we want fruit that tastes like the variety that we're after. So we grow fruit trees often from cuttings or pieces of the plant. And many perennial herbs can be grown from cuttings more easily than seed, or sometimes the clump divided. So we just cut the clump in half and create two new plants. Okay, so if you're a beginner, it is a really good idea to look up the plant that you're wanting to save seed from and check what technique people use to propagate it, because you might find that seed actually is not the best way after all. Okay, so in this section, we're going to look at seed terminology. My goal with teaching is usually to avoid as much jargon as possible and keep things really clear and simple. With seed saving, if we don't talk about some terminology, you will get confused down the track and maybe confused when you're shopping for seeds as well. So I've put the minimum terminology in here that I think we can get away with. And I will put these in notes that you can reference later because there is a lot to take in here. Firstly, I'm going to talk about hybrid seeds. These are a cross between two varieties of the same species, which display some characteristics from each. So in an example, we might think of those green tomatoes being picked unripe and thrown into the back of a vehicle. And they have to be really tough, right, to survive that process. They've got to be a really strong tomato. We might maybe have, though, a beautiful glossy tomato that is a perfect shape, that is very enticing and attractive for consumers at the shops. So if we cross those two varieties together, the hybrid that we might get would be a beautiful brick of a tomato. Okay, so some characteristics of both. The key point with hybrid seeds is that if you were to buy that tomato and then save some seeds from it and plant them, the future generations may not resemble the parent tomato that you bought. So we could go back to having just tough tomatoes, the bricks. We could go to having a couple of beautiful ones. We might have a beautiful brick in there, but we could get something else entirely. So they are what we call genetically unstable, okay, which makes them a bit tricky for people who are looking for consistent results. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got open pollinated seeds, and these are genetically stable. So if we save seed from a tomato that we have bought, it will produce what we call true to type future generations. They are going to look and taste like the parent as long as no little insect has gotten in there and pollinated and accidentally hybridized. Then we have to start all over again. And there is, by the way, a process through which we can transform a hybrid into an open pollinated variety. And that's using something called selection and roguing, which we'll come to later. But that's how they interrelate. We start with a hybrid cross, deliberate or a wild cross in nature, and then we can slowly work on that variety to make it open pollinated over time, if we want to. Okay. No surprises that we're going to emphasize open pollinated seeds because we want to have these consistent results usually as home gardeners. Okay, as an example here, I've got the parents P1 and P2, and these are like the beautiful bricks that I was talking about before. So we've got one variety and the other, and we create a beautiful brick hybrid. And it's just showing you the things that might play out if we planted them. The first generation, we might get a throwback to either parent or something else, or something that looked like our hybrid. If we only take the hybrid ones that we wanted and plant those, then we might end up with a few more. And then gradually over time, we could stabilize until we're getting only the hybrids. And this F1 term is what I wanted to highlight for you, because it's hard to know whether you're getting hybrid seeds or not when you go shopping, and it usually won't be labeled on the packet. What you will see is this term F1, and that means it is a hybrid. So I'm circling that on the sweet corn packet over here, and that's just to show you what to look out for. It doesn't mean you can never buy hybrids, but it's nice to prioritize some of the open pollinated varieties where we can. Okay, so usually around 7 generations of selection, on average, we might produce a open pollinated variety from a hybrid. Okay, so a little bit more terminology for us. I need to talk about genetically modified seeds because they are often confused with hybrid seeds. Hybrids are between two varieties of the same species, and that happens all the time in nature. They get crossed. Genetically modified seeds are something completely different. This does not happen in nature. What we're talking about here is, say, a salmon gene being put into a strawberry. So that can't happen. This is a very high-level scientific project, and we don't usually get offered these as home gardeners in Australia. I've never seen them for sale. We do have a few bans and things on genetic modification. So obviously highly controversial, quite political. I'm not going to go into that tonight. I just want you to know that's a really different thing to hybrid seeds. And now we've got heirloom seeds, which sound so lovely, don't they? Lovely heirlooms. And there isn't a really strict definition for what an heirloom seed is. So I have made one up, which I think makes sense. For me, an heirloom is an old, locally valuable variety of a plant that has been passed down between generations of gardeners and farmers and maybe families as well, I should add. And these are usually open pollinated and they're not patented, which can be a problem with, say, GM or with hybrid seeds. So let me know if you like my definition in there. To confuse things, sometimes you will also see what are called modern heirlooms. And basically, someone has decided that a new variety that's just been bred, is an instant classic. So they call it a modern heirloom. And it seems like a bit of marketing spin to me, even though it's probably a good variety. So heirloom seeds, if someone has handed them to you, they've grown them, someone older than them grew them, you could call them an heirloom seed. And they are, of course, really precious. It's just that there's no firm standards around them. All right, and lastly here we've got organic seeds. Organic seeds are something completely different. This is about how the seed has been produced. So organic seeds have to be certified to be grown in accordance with standards that protect soil health. And this generally prohibits the use of any synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. So you can have organic seeds that are actually hybrid as well. That's not a contradiction, because it's about the way that those seeds were grown. So just keep that in mind. I love to support organic seed producers where I can, but it's also not possible to get every seed I want organic. So for me personally, I don't worry about that too much, but it is, of course, a great thing to support where possible. I'm going to pause there and just check if you do have any questions on that, or maybe I'll do a tiny bit more. But if any of that requires more explanation, please let me know in the chat and I'll clarify. The next thing we'll look at is pollination. Pollination happens when we move some of the grains of pollen from the male part of a flower to a female part of a flower. And this can happen through a few different ways. One of the most famous, of course, being bees. Not just the European bee, Apis mellifera, that you can see here, but also, of course, a lot of native bees are very important as well. This photo, by the way, I couldn't resist showing you, it's a honeybee that has just been in a zucchini or some other cucurbit family, and they roll around in there. They come out completely covered, can't see what's going on. They wobble around and they have to land on a leaf, and then they have to comb all that pollen off their face, and they comb it down into these little baskets on their back legs, which I'll just circle in the image here. So that if you've ever watched a bee, you often can actually see the pollen that they've collected in these little pannier baskets on their legs. So it's really quite fun to observe that out in the garden. Now, there's a lot of other ways that plants can be pollinated, and I wonder if you know some of the other ways. I'll leave a little gap here. Any other pollinators that you know of in the garden? Yes, the wind. Thank you. See, yeah, wind is an important pollinator, but because it's kind of invisible, we often don't notice it. Buzz has been mentioned. So I guess movement that is often created by the wind is the thing in there. So some plants you just need the pollen to fall onto another part, like a tomato, for example. So they can be buzz pollinated. That's kind of the method of transfer. There's some other examples in here of butterflies and beetles. Flies, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Lydia, because flies don't get enough credit for being really essential pollinators. And really any animals walking past, as Kate has said, can collect pollen. And Michael's also pointed out us. And of course, yes, we do pollinate. We can pollinate with a paintbrush, and sometimes we need to do that. Another one I wanted to mention to you is our flying foxes or our fruit bats. And not many people know this, but they are often referred to as the bees of the night because they are essential pollinators of the eucalypt forests up and down the east coast of Australia. So although they might be giving your fruit trees a hard time at the moment, it is incredible. We really need them as essential keystone species in those ecosystems. So a little quick question for you to think about at home. With the photographs on the bottom left and the bottom right of the screen here, how do we know which one of these is pollinated by insects and which one is pollinated by wind? You can pop your answers in the chat box for me, and we can just have a guess. And we've got a little guess in there of the shape, and yet that's true. That's true. Carolyn said the flower is by insects and the corn is by wind. And that is true. But the real secret to learning this is that flowers take a lot of energy for plants to produce. So there is no point creating this beautiful showy thing for the wind, which can't see. So I know it seems obvious once you've had it pointed out, but that will help you to determine whether or not something is after wind or insects. And of course, when we start to think about pollinating and needing to control it sometimes or needing to self-pollinate it with a paintbrush, it helps to kind of know how it prefers to be pollinated. Yes, so the flower is to attract visually the insects. Thanks, Christopher. Right, so with pollination, the other complexity that we can have is that the male and female parts can be on the same flower, and we call those a complete flower. They can be on separate flowers, so we could have male and female flowers on the same plant. We're going to meet one of those later. Or we could actually have separate male and female plants, which is very tricky, of course, because if you only have one or the other, you're not getting viable seeds. That is, we're not really talking about fruit tonight, but kiwi fruit is a famous garden example of that. Asparagus as well, I believe, have male and female plants, and spinach, English spinach, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So this highlights the value of looking up your plant in a seed reference book to double check before you start seed saving. And I'll highlight my favorite reference book for you later in the session. All right, a few more terms before we can move on. With pollination, every plant's got their own preferences. And again, we have another spectrum here where we have self-pollinating plants. These require pollen to be moved from the male to the female parts of the flower on the same plant. So that's quite simple. And we call these inbreeding plants because they can keep their gene pool going and healthy and strong with only a very small number of plants flowering together and swapping pollen. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call cross-pollinating plants, and these require the wind or insects or something else to transfer pollen between plants. So they actually can't fertilize themselves on the same flower. And we call these outbreeding species because they must have a lot of individuals of the same species flowering and swapping pollen all at the same time to maintain their genetic diversity and vigor over time. So if we were to only save seeds from a small number of these plants, it will probably work fine for the first couple of seasons, but over time we might have a weakness or a loss of characteristics that starts to show up. Just backtracking a second, I can see a question on kiwi fruit from Jess in the chat. How can I find out which gender I have so I can purchase the other one needed? Jess, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not a kiwi expert, but you will actually need to wait until the flowers show up, and then the difference will be obvious if you look for male and female kiwi flowers. So there's not an easy way to tell. And of course, nurseries sell both genders of plants. So unfortunately, yeah, that's the only trick that I know. Maybe someone else will have a tip they can pop in the chat for you. Okay, so we have inbreeding plants and we have outbreeding plants, and that's a spectrum. So there'll be ones that are a bit more or less somewhere in the middle, but it is a very helpful thing to know again about your species. So I've talked a little bit about all of these terms and pollination, and now we need to talk about what that means in practice. So plants that are the same species can cross-pollinate. So every type of tomato, for example, or every type of zucchini, uh, each species is going to have lots of different varieties. So we might have red fig tomatoes, we might have black cherry tomatoes. They're different varieties, but they're all tomatoes, all the same species. Uh, to add a little spanner in here, lots of our common vegetables have wild weedy relatives that are the same species. We might not think of them that way, but they are, and they can actually throw their pollen in as well, and that can create some really unpalatable vegetables if we're unlucky. So sometimes, just to make sure we get the same variety or to prevent these tough wild genes coming in, we need to control pollination. So it prevents rather accidental crosses and mutations. So if we wanted to do this, there are some methods, and for a larger seed producer, they would often isolate different varieties by growing them a long way apart. That distance, though, unfortunately, is about how far will a bee fly and how far will a wind blow without being screened or blocked in some way. So that's unfortunately not a very good technique for home gardeners because, of course, bees will go several kilometres and you can guarantee someone else in your neighbourhood is growing the variety. Another one that they would sometimes use commercially is to grow one variety at a time or only allow flowering of one variety at a particular time. Again, completely useless in a suburban context where your neighbours aren't all coordinating. So for home growers, our options to control pollination come down to things like bagging or taping up flowers. I'll show you an example later, or potentially caging whole plants. Keeping in mind that, of course, if the insect was going to come in and pollinate, you would actually have to get your little bee suit on, get a paintbrush and go out and do the pollination yourself because we need that process to happen somehow. So if that sounds like a lot of hard work, it is. And that's why I just want to remind you, controlling pollination is optional. Most home gardeners don't do it, but I'd like you to have some idea of what you could do if you decided for some reason that that's important. There's also the other question with the inbreeding, outbreeding spectrum of how many plants you need to save seed from for strong genetics over time. And each species, when you look them up, will have a recommended number to ensure the gene pool stays diverse and stable and produce strong plants. For inbreeding plants, like common beans, you may need 10 plants, and even that can be quite a lot, to be honest, for a small garden like mine. So that's an inbreeding plant. For an outbreeding plant like corn, depending on what book you read, anywhere from 50 to 200 plants, all flowering and swapping their pollen at once is important for that species to stay strong. If we didn't do that, yeah, we would start to see weaker plants over time, for example. So this can be a bit of a shock and cause people to go, oh, maybe seed saving is not for me. Don't worry. Don't let any of this put you off. The key here is just try and save seeds from as many plants as you can. And try not to be discouraged if you can't follow the guidelines. Home gardeners rarely have the right numbers of plants and they almost never control pollination, and the results are usually great. I've had many excellent seeds given to me from people who've never known how to do this. And you might actually create a new variety in doing so, and you get to name it if it's a brand new one that's crossed in your garden. So where I do think this is important is if you have a very special, say an heirloom variety, and I have had people literally in my classes say to me, these are my nonna's tomatoes. I must learn how to save seed from them. We have to keep this special variety going. And in that case, we do want you to know about these things so that you can take all the precautions and make sure that you don't lose that variety through some accidental cross in the garden. Okay, so I hope I haven't put you off. That's most of the terminology. I think I've just got one more little bit to go. And in the question I've got in Joanne's chat, the nursery told me to buy 4 kiwi. That way I should get at least 1 male. Oh, well, it sounds expensive. Good for the nursery. I guess there's odds in there, depending on how many they sold in the first place or stocked in the nursery. So I hope that works out for you, Joanne. And corn is definitely a cross pollinating or an outbreeding plant, a very strongly outbreeding plant, probably one of the strongest outbreeders in the common vegetable group. So I hope that helps. Okay, last little bit before we get on to the more fun techniques. The power of selection. Very excitingly, this is a quote from Carol Deppe or Deep, sorry, I can't pronounce her name because I've only read it. She says there's no such thing as seed saving without plant breeding. So that's exciting. You actually get to all be plant breeders. And to illustrate that, let me give you an example. Let's say in a few weeks' time, I walk out into my garden and I think, oh my goodness, I haven't saved any tomato seeds yet, but there's only 2 left on the vine. There's a really beautiful, large, delicious one. And then there's a small kind of runty one that looks like it might be a little bit diseased or something like that going on. And I go, oh, great. Well, I can have that nice one for lunch. And oh, thank goodness I've got that little one for seeds for next year. Have I made a mistake? Can you pick what the problem is there? So, of course, the issue is that if I pick the small runt one for seeds for next year, those seeds are going to be tiny, they're going to be weak, and I'm guaranteeing tiny and weak plants for next season. So the rule of thumb that my mum taught me is you keep the best and you eat the rest. So it's really important that you save seed from the best and strongest varieties that you can and the best specimens on that single plant. So in my garden, you'll often see some tags like this photo here. I'll have ribbons or something tied around a fruit or something or a plant. And that's to just tell everyone in my household, no, 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 this is not for dinner. This is an important seed harvest, so leave me alone. So you might like to go out and start doing some selection and tagging to make sure you get the best. Roguing is probably the last term I'll look at here. Roguing is where you might actually remove plants that are not performing well so that their pollen doesn't get into that gene pool and the seed then doesn't get into your seed bank for next year. So often it's plant breeders that do that, but I think it's nice to just understand that concept as well as a home gardener. Okay, that's a lot of terminology for you. So now we are going to move into the more fun part, which is seed saving techniques by plant family. And I've organized them from the ones I think are simplest for beginners through to the more complex ones. And along the way, we'll look at techniques, and you can use these for many, many different plants, not just the family that I've allocated them to. I hope it'll give you some idea of how to start. So the very first family that we're looking at is one that's great for beginners, and that is the Fabaceae or the bean family, also known as legumes. So this includes beans, broad beans, peas, snow peas, and also our native acacias and wattles as well are in this category. So quite similar concepts. So a thing that is going to be a consistent theme really throughout seed saving is that you must harvest the seed when it's fully mature. I will repeat myself a few times. This family is a great example because we usually harvest the beans in the top left corner here when they're quite young, when they are not stringy or lumpy. But if you want seed from them, you have to wait until they are really large, lumpy, until the pod's getting a little bit soft and bendy as well, or until they've even dried on the plant. That's a good guarantee. So it's quite different the stage that you'll be picking them for seeds. Yeah, if I had a pod live with you, I would be bending one of these big knobbly green ones here, and you would see that the pod had kind of lost all of its rigidity and was really quite soft, and the beans are enlarged inside it and almost starting to become a bit loose in there. So just picture a really, really, really mature bean. And after that, they shrink down as they dry to something like these dried ones in the bottom left corner. Okay, so the best guarantee that you've got them at the ultimate mature end is to let them dry on the plant. However, what can happen if you leave them on the plant is we may get a heavy rain, and those dried seeds might soak it up and start to sprout or germinate. And that's what you can see on the bottom middle photograph here. The seeds in my hand here have actually sprouted. And once they've done that, you don't get a second chance. So those seeds will never work for me as proper seeds anymore. So if they are fairly mature out there on the plant and dry, and there's a big rain coming, or a couple of days of rain, I actually go out and harvest everything, including the ones that are still a bit green, as you can see in the left photo, just to make sure that we don't have that problem, or that they don't start rotting on the plant, which is the other problem. When I've taken them inside, I will shell them into a basket, like you can see on the top in the middle. I do this because if we left them in the pods, again, there's moisture still there, and that can start to sprout or to rot the seeds. So I do shell them. At this stage here, we're going to leave them indoors at room temperature in the shade for about 2 or 3 weeks until they've all dried down to their kind of stable point. This is a key thing as well. We don't want them exposed to any heat source, so we're not going to put them in the oven. We're also not going to let them be in the sun, because sun can actually heat them up, and that heat will destroy their life. It'll reduce their germination rate down the track. So we don't want these seeds getting hot. So indoors around 20, 25 degrees is perfect for them. Just make sure that they're not getting a heat source or any hot sun on them. Now, you could actually leave the seeds there and they would be fine to plant. But an extra trick that I have for this family is that there is a pest called a bean weevil that actually lays eggs in them that you can't see, and then hatches out midwinter and goes rampaging through your seed box. So to tackle that tricky little pest, the extra step that I do for my beans and peas is I will wrap them up tightly in a Ziploc bag once they're very dry, and I will freeze them for about 3 days. Now, it is very important that they're properly dry, because they will be damaged if their cells are expanding as they freeze. And it's really important that when you take them out of the freezer, you let that bag come back up to room temperature before you open it. If you don't do that, as all cold things from the freezer do, you'll start to get water condensing on the surface, and that will mean your seeds get wet and they again will start to rot or germinate. So just be really careful that they stay nice and dry and they come back up to room temperature in the bag. But that is an excellent trick that you can use for, as far as I'm aware, any seed. Every seed I've tried survives freezing just fine, and that will filter out any pests like grain moths or bean weevils or anything that gets into your seed box if you ever need to use it. Final trick with this family is that you'll always get small, again, I use the word runt, but you always get some small and badly formed seeds in every pod, as well as the good looking larger ones here. So with this family that you can actually see the seeds and handle them, do a bit of a grade and get rid of these small ones, as you only really want to plant these perfect full size, really large seeds for best results. That's everything I'm going to offer you for the bean family for Basie. Let me know if you do have any questions in the chat and we'll come back to those. I'm going to move on now to Solanaceae, and this is the tomato family or Solanums. Another really great one for beginners. Both the Solanaceae and the Fabaceae, the beans, are highly inbreeding, self-pollinating plants. So we don't need many of them going to seed together to have really great results. And in fact, the flowers in this these two families often pollinate themselves before they open, which means you're actually quite unlikely to get accidental crosses as well, which is really, really handy. So this family, Solanaceae, is all of our tomatoes, capsicums, chilies, eggplant, and also for people interested in native seeds, kangaroo apple. If you have never met a kangaroo apple before, don't get too excited. It's not really an edible plant, and they're actually quite poisonous until they're fully ripe. But they are an important plant in the native ecosystems around Naarm, Melbourne. And I think it's nice to know you can use these techniques on them as well. For this family, if you've got a dry fleshed fruit, it is as simple as scraping out the seeds when the fruit is fully mature. So on the left here, I've got a bull's horn capsicum, my favorite capsicums. And if you look closely, you'll see that it's gone wrinkly, which is a good clue that that's starting to mature and really start to rot after this, really. And again, we've got to make sure we harvest things when they're mature, because a lot of our capsicums, you might be used to eating them green. That is an immature capsicum. They all, as far as I'm aware, either turn red or yellow or purple or some other color other than green when they're actually mature. And in this case, I want them past that point so that the seeds are fully hardened and at full size. So I've got a nice wrinkly capsicum here. But I'm basically just scraping out those seeds onto a plate and labeling it, and then again letting them dry about 2 or 3 weeks indoors at room temperature until they're ready to be stored in my seed box. So you can use that dry technique for chilies, and you can use it for eggplant. If you've got a wet-fleshed Solanaceae, like a tomato, for example, there are 2 techniques that we can use. The first one is the simplest one, and the way my mum has saved tomato seeds for my entire life. So it does work very well. And that is simply to get your kind of squashy, rotten, mature tomato, like the top right here, and just squeeze it out onto some paper towel or kitchen paper, whatever you call it. And that's the bottom right photo here. And then you'll let that kitchen paper towel dry, same indoors, a couple of weeks. And then you can write the variety on it, and you'll actually fold that up and put it in your seed box as it is. When you want to grow those tomato seeds, you can tear off a piece of paper with some seeds attached and plant it. And the paper, of course, will biodegrade. So it's a really nice, elegant, very simple, convenient way. Just squeeze your tomato out onto some kitchen paper, write the variety, let it dry, store it. So that works beautifully. If you're a tomato seed producer, though, there is a more correct way to save tomato seeds, and that involves fermenting them. So in this example here, what we're going to do is scoop out the tomato seeds and all the gel, like wet flesh that they come in, and we're going to let it sit in a jar or a bowl until it develops this really funky smell and a white surface mold, which is your top middle photograph. What that fermentation is going to do is break apart that gel and allow you to clean those seeds really thoroughly. And that's the reason why this technique is used, because that flesh or the gel could actually be harboring diseases that can then transfer between one garden to another, or from one year to the next in your own garden. And if you actually wash them in a sieve under some running water after fermenting, you'll actually get them so clean that you'll see the little hairs on the tomato seed when they dry. So it does actually clean them really, really well. So I'll usually scrub them against the sieve under running water, and then I'll spread them out and just leave them to dry in that sieve, because it's a really good aerated environment and they're not going to retain moisture and then get moldy before they can dry out. Okay, so we've covered beans and we've covered the tomato family. Do let me know if you've got any questions on these in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. The next few families are all quite similar in the way that we get the seeds out of them and treat them. So I'll go through them just quickly to show you what they look like and give you a couple of tips. This family is the Amaranthaceae, or the beet family, that includes amaranth, silver beet, chard, beetroot, spinach, and quinoa. These are all wind pollinated, which hopefully you picked up because the flowers on them are really not showy at all. They're hard to spot. And this photo here is a mass of multiple plants. In these families, you often need around the kind of 10 plants, maybe 20, going to seed at the same time to have good viability over time. And this highlights really one of the issues of seed saving for small home gardeners is you need them in the bed for longer and you need a much bigger space to let them produce their seed heads. So it can be a little bit tricky at times to meet those recommendations. Here's an example of the flowers on these and then the seed pods that develop for this family. This is silver beet. On the top, you'll notice this is still quite green, this stem, and these little pods here are quite small. So if I were to squeeze these, I would not actually feel much in there. And that is a great way of figuring out whether the seeds are ready or not. So go around, do a lot of pinching. The bottom row here, I'd like you to see it's gone yellow, and that's a great indicator that the mother plant is starting to die and all of the energy that's ever going to transfer into the seed has gone there. So that's a great sign. And also when I squeeze the pods now, they feel hard and they feel large. So I know that there's going to be some good seed in there. So I do a lot of pinching to check where things are at in the garden, especially if rain is coming and I need to harvest them and I'm not sure if they're ready yet. Just a little fun fact, by the way, with silver beet and with beetroot plants, these little corky packages contain multiple seeds, which is why when you plant one, you'll end up with multiple plants coming up. So a little fun fact, but you don't need to try and separate them. Next family is Apiaceae, the carrot family, also known as umbels. They produce these little umbrella-shaped flowers. This is carrots, parsnips, fennel, parsley, dill, coriander, celery. We've got some native cresses and things that fall into this category as well. This is showing you again what the flowers look like on the left and what the developing seeds look like. And then there's a dill on the right-hand side and parsley. So again, I'm squeezing and I'm looking for a yellow stem to let me know that those seeds are maturing. Next family is Asteraceae, the lettuce or the daisy family. Includes lettuce, endive, chicory sunflower, and also the murnong or the yam daisy, which is one of the important staple foods of the Naarm, Melbourne area for Aboriginal people. This is unfortunately an incredibly rare plant now, but that it is sold sometimes in native nurseries. So if you wanted to save seeds from it and start growing more, which is of course a great thing to do, that you would treat it in this way as well. It's essentially a native dandelion. And that's a photo of it in the center there. It looks very, very similar. This family all have like these packages of seeds that often have fluff on them. So this is a lettuce seed head that you see here. So yeah, many of them, including native dandelions, of course, have got the fluffy tufts. So it's a nice little feature that gets expressed in different ways. Next family is Amaryllidaceae, or the onion family. Includes onions, spring onions, leeks, chives, and garlic chives. They tend to form these spectacular globes of flowers, either purple or white. And when they explode like little firework balls, there's black seeds in here usually, so that's what they will look like. And then we're going to jump up a level. So everything we've just covered in that chunk after tomatoes and beans is a sort of intermediate category in terms of doing it correctly at the difficulty level. Brassica is moving into the hard territory. And the reason for that is that the Brassica family are strongly outbreeding and also have wild relatives that are tricky. So this diagram is a great way of explaining it because it shows you that all of these common vegetables that you'll know and love, hopefully love, are bred from the same species, Brassica oleracea. And this is a common wild weedy brassica that grows everywhere, all throughout the city. And that's the bottom left there. That's some from my local park. So it's just actually quite incredible that we have developed all of these vegetable varieties from one single species. But it does mean that the pollen of these wild weedy brassicas are compatible and can accidentally get mixed in with your cabbages, with your kale, with your kohlrabi, or you might actually find the kale crossing with the Brussels sprouts and then producing kale sprouts next year. But, that would still be edible, but we can end up with some really weird and wild results. Again, not really a problem, but yeah, just a difficult family if you care about having the true to type seeds the next year for your garden. The seed heads here, they actually look like pods. They're technically not pods botanically, but yeah, they have these lots of giant pod shapes. Right, so with all of those groups we just looked at, as I said, the main themes for seed saving are waiting until those flowers have fully matured the seeds, which we're going to tell by looking for yellow stems and also pinching them to make sure there's some hard seeds that have developed. When we harvest those, what we'll do is tie them up in bunches, label them because they all look pretty similar within the same family, and then we're going to tie them up somewhere that's undercover and preferably in the shade and doesn't get too hot. So I do actually put washing on this washing line sometimes as well, but this is my most convenient spot for drying seeds. And I do have a lot of seed bunches here because I'm teaching seed saving quite regularly. So find a spot that's undercover, not too hot, hang these up to dry until they sound crispy. So we do want them like properly dried for the next step. And so, yeah, the crispy sound is usually the good indicator, and seeds falling out if you rub them between your fingers or little bits of the stem snapping are good indicators as well. Cool. Michael, I can see your question on garlic cloves. If it's all right, I might come back to that at the end, just so I don't lose the thread. Right, so we'll look at a couple of other techniques that are relevant for these groups. And where we do have quite large seed heads that are easy to handle, it might be as simple as just pulling them out. So here I have some marigold seeds, and I'm just opening up those dried flower heads, and there are the seeds falling out. So I actually just would do them by hand because it's the most straightforward way, and pick out some of the chaff or the bits that aren't seed. So we can dry clean them. Another dry cleaning method is to sieve them. So I know you probably don't need to see me sieving things, but here's me sieving some amaranth seed. And it is extremely helpful to build up a range of sieves with different gauges. So I've been hunting in op shops and I've got a fine one, medium ones. I've got a really chunky one, which perfectly grades out my coriander from all the bits of stem and things. So just go looking for a range of different sieve sizes in the op shop and or grab them from your kitchen if you already have them as well. All right, and the last processing technique for these seeds, and actually my personal favorite, and you'll see why, is winnowing, which is an ancient method for separating the chaff from the seeds. Now, before I've done this, I've actually done a threshing step, which I don't have a slide for or a video. But if you can imagine me just holding those bunches from a few slides back by the stems and just running my hands down them to kind of strip the seeds off them or the pods off them or whatever's on there. So just like quite quickly and quite hard, just rub your hands down them. And also you can rub your hands around them to shatter all those little packages of seeds and just get them dropping hopefully into a bowl, but usually onto a piece of fabric like this. And here my friend Grace is helping me. So we've just shattered all this seed onto this piece of cloth, and then we're going to pick it up and just carefully tip them into a bowl. So that's a threshing step to just release the seeds from the packaging that they've come in. So from there, I'm going to shake the bowl quite a lot, and there's going to be a lot of chaff that just sits on the surface. So I'll pull out a few handfuls of that. And then when we start getting down to the seed, we're going to winnow. So here's a little video of that process. So I hope you enjoyed that. I always just love, love, love doing this. And the key things, I'll just play it again. I'm tilting that bowl away from me. I'm shaking it because the seeds are heavier and they drop to the bottom. And then I'm blowing in like a horseshoe shape around the bowl. You'll work that out pretty quickly, but that horseshoe shape is the way that drives off the chaff. You will also lose a bit of seed through winnowing, and that, believe it or not, is a good thing because the seed that you will blow off is the lightest seed, and the lightest seed is the weakest seed. And so what you've actually done by winnowing is also select for slightly stronger seeds overall. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I do encourage you to have a go at winnowing because it's just such a beautiful feeling to do it. It works much better when there is a big weight difference between the chaff and the seed. So if you find that you are losing too much seed, then you might need to go back to sieving to process that variety. Okay, last couple of families that we're going to go through. Of course, we have to cover the cucurbitaceae because they're a very common vegetable, especially at this time of year. This is the pumpkin family that includes pumpkin, cucumber, zucchini, squash, watermelon, etc., etc. Once again, there is a really big difference between the vegetables that we usually pick and eat in this family and the mature vegetables that are ready for seed collection. In this family, if you've got them coming up in your compost, it is almost certainly a pumpkin because the pumpkins are really the only ones that we eat once they're mature. If you were to eat a zucchini when it's mature, it's actually called a marrow. You'll be chomping down on really hard, unpleasant seeds in there. So the reason we don't have any unpleasant things getting in the way when we're eating zucchini is we pick them tiny and immature. So just to show you that, I've got some tromboncino here. These are the small ones that I pick to eat as zucchini, but if I let them mature, this is the one in the center that they'll turn into. So just make sure that we've got them at that stage, and they're usually a yellow or an orange color, even if it started out as a little green zucchini. This family is one that you should know about, producing different male and female flowers on the same plant. It's quite fun actually to go looking for them because every one is going to have a teeny weeny little version of the vegetable to come. In this case, we've got a mini cucumber. Can you spot the cucumber here if I circle it with my mouse? And so this is obviously the female flower. Over here, we've got the male flower. And male flowers in this family have a single boring stem. That's how we can recognize the difference between them. So we do need to get pollen from the male flowers to the female flowers on this family. And this is a good example of where you could actually control pollination by taping up flowers. So here's an example where you could actually tape a flower shut from male and female flowers the night before they're going to open. And I know it sounds tricky, but I'll show you an example in a minute. And then the next day you could come and break off the male flower, take off the petals, and then tap it into the female flower. Then you would actually close that flower and tape it shut again. And that will make sure that no little bee is going to get in there before or after you and add their own pollen from somewhere else. So this pumpkin would then grow into a true to type pumpkin that will definitely produce pumpkins that look and taste like the parent the next year. So this is a technique you can do as a home gardener if you want to. You can also just roll the dice, and you might have butternuts and Jap pumpkins one year and juddernuts the next. Not necessarily a problem, but again, you can end up with some surprising results. There are actually 3 different species of pumpkin, I should say, within the pumpkin family, and they'll cross within the family. So if you were growing 2 that are from different species, then they won't have the ability to cross. And I just can't remember if Jap and butternut are in the same one off the top of my head. Anyway, I digress. This is a fun photograph to show people just to learn a little bit about this family because it contains male flowers, female flowers, flowers that have opened already, flowers that are about to open, pollinated and unpollinated. So see if you can kind of pick any of those groups, really. And after you've had some thinking time, I'll just start pointing them out for you. So the male flowers are this one here on a long stem, this one here, this one here, the obvious ones I can see. The female flowers are the ones with immature fruit. So we've got one just here, got one here, and of course these ones here were all female flowers as well, even though some of them have lost the petals. Now, this zucchini here is developing normally. So we know that this one was pollinated correctly. This one over here on the right-hand side that's become swollen, but also yellow at the tip, this one didn't get pollinated. And it's confusing because it has grown a little bit, but this is a classic pattern for flowers in this family that were not pollinated, where we start to see rotting at the flower end. So if you're seeing a lot of that, it means your pollination's not happening, and you might actually need to get out with a paintbrush and do some some hand pollinating. And I do find I need to do that sometimes for zucchini. Finally, this one here, we don't know yet. This one could have been pollinated or not, but the flower has already opened and is now collapsing. So we know that one is past whatever's happened has happened. Just to show you, this is a flower that will open tomorrow, and this is a flower that's already opened. So you can kind of look for the difference here, and that will help you if you wanted to do hand pollinating. Charlie has said, I currently have pumpkins that have a low amount of female flowers and small pumpkins keep growing but not being properly pollinated. How could I prevent this in future? Well, it can be really tricky sometimes when you get a lot of female or male flowers and not them in balance. My way of solving that has been to have more than one plant, just because you get more chances of having the male and female arrive at the same time. Some varieties and some temperature conditions, I think, can also contribute to that, but I don't know too much about it, Charlie. If they're not being properly pollinated, like I said, you can actually just get out there in the mornings, ideally, with a little paintbrush, and you can swirl it around in a male flower and then swirl it around in the female ones. And it does make quite a big difference if you do that and you're having pollination problems. I hope that helps. Okay, we're going to bang through a couple more. The wet cleaning seeds, you really don't need to see this, but you just basically pull them out of the flesh. You wash it, and then again, I use a sieve to sort of scrub it because sieves are very abrasive and it's good for getting the last little bits off. And then once you've done all that, I'll just actually let them dry in the sieve because it's a nice aerated environment for them. Great. I'll come back to your question, Andrea, just keeping an eye on the clock. But yeah, we'll come back to that at the end. Last family I was going to talk about tonight is Poaceae, or the grass family, which in the home garden is usually limited to corn or maybe sugarcane for people in quite warm areas, maybe maize if you've got a larger garden. Also, many of our native grass varieties, in fact, probably all of them are in Poaceae. This is quite interesting for home gardeners often. This is your corn plant, and the pollen comes from the bit at the top, and the pollen has to settle on the threads at the bottom. Those threads were active because they were quite shiny and light coloured. And these ones here are not active anymore because they've gone brown. Now, the thing that's fascinating is that every little kernel in your corn cob is connected to a single thread of those corn silks. So in other words, a grain of pollen has to land on every single corn silk to grow into a kernel. And if you get a corn cob that looks more like the one in the middle, which I did one year, clearly, that means the pollination was quite poor. And this is one of the reasons why you're advised to plant quite a lot of corn and also to plant them in a block rather than plant them in a line. This family is wind pollinated. So if you were to plant a line of corn and the wind, when they're flowering and dropping pollen, and the wind is actually carrying the pollen away, you probably never get cobs forming properly. So it really helps to understand the way pollination works so you can get more cobs on the left rather than cobs like the center. This is also a family where hybrids are quite common because it can be complicated to pick heirloom and open pollinated corns at the right time for sweetness before they start to go quite, just unpleasant. So once you've actually got them pollinated, that's the hard bit. And processing them for seed is a matter of just peeling back the husk. And then I like to tie them to a broom handle or something like that and just have a beautiful ornamental display in the kitchen while they're drying. Once they're dry, then you can just shuck them off the kernel, or off the cob rather, and then you can put them away in your seed box. So yeah, quite straightforward, but getting them pollinated in a small home garden can be a bit tricky. All right, so those are your main plant families, and I hope that's given you an idea of the different ways that you can approach seed saving for different family groups. We've gone through dry cleaning, wet cleaning, little techniques like sieving and winnowing and fermenting and things like that as well. The last thing we have to do is talk about what to do with the seed once you've processed and dried it. And one of the mantras I'd really like you to take away from tonight is cool, dark, and dry. Because like we said at the beginning, these are actually alive and we need to store them and treat them carefully so that they're still living and vibrant when we come to plant them in the next season. So seeds really don't like to go up and down in temperature or humidity. They like to stay nice and cool. So have a think for a minute about where might be the best place to store them at your house. And I'll give you a hint. For a lot of people, don't store them in the garden shed. Garden sheds can often get very, very hot. And the classic Australian garden shed made of just tin will be getting up over 60 degrees on a hot day. So definitely, definitely don't be storing your seeds in there. Another common mistake for people is maybe putting them on display in the sun, nice sunny windowsill full of glass jars. Don't do that either because the sun will make them surprisingly hot and you'll find their germination rate will go down. Also be careful about storing them somewhere like your fridge because your fridge can get quite damp and humid. And if they're not properly sealed up, then the seeds can start to go moldy. If you wanted to and you had enough space, you could store your seeds in a freezer because that doesn't tend to have the problems with the humidity, as long as you keep them tightly sealed and allow them to come up to room temperature again when you take them out before you open the plastic bag. And freezing your entire seed box could actually be what you need to do if you discover pests. So for me, the best place to store my seeds is actually either under my bed or in the front room of my house, which is south facing and tends to stay the coolest of any of our rooms. So just have a think about which places in your home might have the right microclimate that is cool, dark, and dry. Once you've found that, it doesn't really matter whether they're in paper bags or reused plastic bags or plastic containers or glass jars. All of them work, but I do recommend that you keep your box tightly sealed because seeds are food and there will be pests that come looking for them. If not the rodent variety, the most common ones that I've seen are grain moths that you probably recognize from your pantry, and also the cheeky bean weevils. And here's a photo of them. And I actually caught one hatching out, if you can see down the very bottom here. So this is what will happen to your seeds if you don't freeze them in my neighborhood. And you can see they leave these little pot mark holes, which greatly reduce the viability of the seeds. So yeah, a tight sealed box is good, but you also have the backup of freezing if you need to. Finally, people often ask me about these silica gel sachets that we tend to find in all these consumer goods these days. And I save them quite, preciously when I get a new thing, because it doesn't happen very often. And these are very useful to go in your seed box and keep it nice and dry. But you do need to re-dry them because they do their job and then they are less effective. So with your silica gel sachets. Just make a calendar reminder every year to take them out of your seed box, dry them in the hot sun outside on a 40-degree day, and then they can go back into your seed box again for another year. And they do work really, really well at that job. All right, final few things from me. When you save seeds, suddenly you'll have hundreds and thousands of them. You can't plant them all, as I said, and you probably can't even give them to friends and family because there'll be that many. So I wanted to highlight for you that many councils now have seed libraries. This is fantastic, partly because libraries are just such a good, cool, dark, dry place for seeds to be stored in the first place. But also, of course, you can share them with people in your community that you might never get to meet face to face. So these seed libraries have popped up all around the city. And I think the key thing here is that you have to use them or you'll lose them because they are being currently stocked by councils, many of them. But if seeds don't start coming back, then they won't be able to continue them. So I just beg you to go and ask your local library if there is a seed library. And if there is, please, please, please take some of your seeds there and keep these going because I think it's just such a great resource for people who are having trouble accessing seeds from more commercial sources. So do have a look out for your local seed libraries. Last little thing from me before some books. If you want to, there's one other challenge I have for you, which is to stand by a variety. Now, at the start, I talked about the importance of our agricultural biodiversity alongside our native plant biodiversity as well. And I talked about the heritage and how small farmers and home gardeners over hundreds and thousands of years have actually developed all of these varieties that we now treasure today. But we are at risk of losing them. But all it will take is each of us just picking one that's special to us and making sure that it survives us and sharing it freely with other people. So I've picked the rattlesnake bean and I give them away to anyone who will take them. My friend Pee-wei has picked glass gem corn, which now that we've been through the families, you can appreciate the commitment because corn is a tricky one, especially for home gardeners. So Pee-wei, when she gives out her glass gem corn, she sends them out with inspirational quotes, growing advice. You get a letter that talks about the heritage of seed, how she takes care of it and grows 200 every year. It also comes with a Facebook group for glass gem corn growers. It comes with Pee-wei's cornbread recipe. And so she's really waving the flag for this special heirloom variety. And I just invite you to think about a seed that might be significant or exciting for you in some way and share it freely and widely and make sure that it outlives you. That's my little challenge. Finally tonight, I wanted to show you some reference books because as we know now, it does help to look up the variety when you're learning and make sure you're across whether it's inbreeding or outbreeding and whether the flowers are male and female, male or female, or whether you have male and female plants that you need to organise. So I've got a couple of books for you here. The classic Australian reference book is on the left. If I'm honest though, the book in the middle is the one that I'll pick up first because it is much more comprehensive and has much more detail and lots of photographs as well. It is, however, a North American reference book, so keep that in mind, but I still find it the most useful. This one is Suzanne Ashworth's Seed to Seed. On the right-hand side, this is a book for people who are getting really excited about this stuff, and it's where I learned most of the information about plant genetics that I shared with you earlier in the session. Okay, so there's some reference books that I hope are helpful for you. I'm going to now just go back to the other slides and put up a feedback code for you. At least I'm going to try to. And we'll take some questions as well. But if people need to leave, I will just say that I'm going to send you a feedback form through My Smart Garden. And this feedback form, and you can also complete it now, of course, on your screen, is essential to keeping this free program running. So if you enjoyed tonight and found it valuable, if you're watching online in the future or if you're live now, could you please take 90 seconds and fill in a few boxes for us? And if you didn't find it useful, then of course we'd really like to know why, so we could keep improving. We've got more events coming up throughout the year on the My Smart Garden website, mysmartgarden.org.au. And if you put your name down for our newsletter, we can tell you when they are so that you don't miss out, because we do book out quite regularly. So I hope tonight's been helpful for you. What I'm going to do now is circle back to a couple of questions that popped in. If you need to head off, thank you so much for coming. Happy seed saving. I hope your summer crops wrap up nicely for you, and we'll see you again at another session.